More than a buzzword, digital identity promises to unlock lots of benefits to consumers and businesses alike in many sectors like healthcare, government, legal, and especially financial sector, our domain. However, lack of interoperability or data privacy issues sometimes hinder the development of these advantages. Ahead of the European Identity and Cloud Conference 2021, organized by Kupinger Call, we sit with Don Thibault, who is project lead at Open Digital Trust Initiative, and Dawe Liklama, who is owner and founder of InnoPay, to learn how would a global bank identity scheme look like and what are the benefits of stakeholders. Hi guys, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to meet you, Don. And I'll start with you. So Don, you are project lead at Open Digital Trust Initiative. What is this initiative and how does your professional background tie into this topic of digital identity?
Well, the initiative is that of the Institute of International Finance, a research arm. And what they've been trying to do is to find new ways, both in the policy realm and the technology realm, to create a globally interoperable infrastructure so that we can do the one thing that we must do, which is to create a more secure system of sharing identity data at a high volume, a high velocity, and through a variety of applications in the financial and identity ecosystems. So that study really is a look at policy on behalf of the Institute of International Finance. And what we're trying to do is to educate regulators, bankers, and the fintech world about the rules and tools of identity. The rules are the governance, the regulation, the legislation that's changing at a very rapid pace in open banking, and the tool set, the technology, and most importantly, the technical standards that really sit at the intersection of identity and open banking. So we think that only when you combine the rules and tools, governance and technical interoperability, can you really make a substantive change? Can you really have the kind of safe, privacy protecting, and easy to use infrastructure that we need on a global basis?
Yeah, and now maybe can you talk a little bit about your professional background?
Sure. I've, for the last 10 years, been privileged to lead the OpenID Foundation. And that foundation has produced a variety of standards that have become part of the plumbing of identity infrastructure, both for the consumer and the enterprise. OpenID Connect is really one of the pieces of plumbing that allow us to work in a variety of application sets, and has really been adopted by most of the major platforms on a global basis. So that's OpenID Connect. On top of that, and I think because of the pandemic, we've seen an acceleration in two fundamental global standards. One is for eKYC, and the other is for what we call financial grade APIs. They really reflect the two burning business problems that we see on a global basis. One is the instance of fraud and other malactors attacking our global banking and financial institution system. And one only goes as far as the FATFA reports to see how serious that's become. So we need a global security standard on a technical level to fight that. But also, and importantly, we need new ways for citizens to identify themselves, ways that don't involve in-person proofing or stacks and stacks of paper, We need to do that to make things more secure, to be more inclusive, and to protect privacy. So the EKYC standard of the OpenID Foundation and the FAPI standard, the financial grade API standards, really have become immensely important as we try and do a better job of having these secure online transactions for both enterprises and citizens alike. So the OpenID Foundation, again, is contributing the technical standards. The world that you're very familiar with is the more confusing and challenging world of global policy, global regulation. And both suffer from the same problem, fragmentation. With fragmentation, there's no interoperability. With no interoperability, there's no security. With no security, there's no economic engine that drives financial inclusion or more secure banking transactions.
Okay.
So that's where I've been coming from.
Yeah. So yeah, regarding OpenID, I took some keywords like plumbing of identity, financial APIs. That way, we all know your valuable work and ideas regarding secure and private data sharing. How is this topic connected with digital identity and InnoPay's favorite data spaces?
Yeah, very much connected. And Dawn also said it. The EKYC and identity data sharing. That is almost data sharing on its most critical and smallest in terms of focused data set. Identity data is something we try already for ages to organize that in a proper way. And we have been already, we know it's possible because we are successful in payments. Payments is a very limited set of data, including a very bundled way of identity, which leads to transfer of trust and value across the globe instantly. So the whole idea, and what Don is also advocating about, a decentralized ecosystem of different solutions, but all interoperable or made interoperable, that is what our vision set out. And we strongly believe that the future is for decentralization, because that will give the most fair, resilient, privacy-proof, and so on, digital economy with maximum choice and innovation. And this is why that has been the focus of my work also in the past 20 years. I kind of accidentally discovered the payments world as an engineer. Then I got fascinated by, hey, this works globally but has no central point. Can't we evolve towards other applications of this idea? So hence we came into digital identity, and there you see already globally different solutions in this direction, which we call schemes or trust frameworks. And that you can expand even to data sharing and the thing what you mentioned, data spaces, which is now the word being coined a lot here in Europe, where the policy and the policymakers and they are very much looking for this different paradigm of a decentralized economy, and that is way bigger than only the identity data, but the identity is a conditional element of anything digital, anything going forward digital. We need to fix or at least improve the identity and identity options. And we strongly believe that collaboration, coordination, interoperability, trust, governance, all these things associated with decentralized structures is crucial.
Okay, so Don, Dawe mentioned a lot about decentralized economy and digital economy with maximum choice, both that would work with a proper digital identity scheme in place. Recently, 100 business, technical, and legal experts in identity and banking have co-authored a white paper called the Global Assured Identity Network. What are the main takes of this white paper?
Well, first and foremost, that it's a crazy idea.
Like the most innovative ones usually are.
Well, it really started with a challenge that several of us began with, which is that we really believe that now is the time for this bank identity data sharing infrastructure to occur. Many of us read very carefully the Citi white paper that came out with a title called the Age of Consent. Tony McLaughlin at Citi was one of the prime movers. And what Tony said was that if banks don't take on the challenge of sharing digital identity data, they'll leave a void that will be filled by fintechs and big tech. And so several of us, admirers of Tony, and said, well, what is it that banks should do? And what should they do now? So let's do a blueprint. But let's do a blueprint that is characterized by three things. It's no logos, no sponsors, and it's all pro bono. So what happened is that friends began to invite friends to collaborate on this blueprint for this international piece of infrastructure, piece of plumbing. And we challenged ourselves with what can be done, not what can be talked about, what can be debated, what can be theorized, but what can be done today that would promote the secure sharing of high assurance identity information between and among banks and other financial institutions on a global basis. So one thing led to another, one person invitation led to another, to now we have over 100 authors from all over the world, all experts in the business models of identity and open banking, the legal constraints, liability, etc., the operational issues and the technical issues, as well as the social issues. So all these experts have come together and are crowding into this kitchen, madly writing a white paper that my friend on this panel has to edit. So how the editors manage 100 cooks in the kitchen will be a minor miracle. But in all seriousness, we wanted to challenge ourselves and our colleagues to lay out on an open source basis what we think can be done today.
So Dawe, can you jump in? What can it be done today? Yeah.
Well, indeed, having the 100 cooks is quite an experience. But the cooks came together. At least they have a rather good image of what the meal should look like, or at least how it should taste. And you have all sorts of food preparation, which can different ways can lead to the same taste along the way. But it is the whole effort is to make again the point, because Tony made a landmark publication, but besides Tony's publication, there are many, many, many others over the last 15 years who have made the point that the financial institutions have an important role to play in digital identity. And there are a few very good examples across the globe. Canada is one of them, but also in Scandinavian countries. But on a scale compared to the amount of people having bank accounts, this is a very small number. But it's proven that it really works. So we don't really need to there is nothing to be discovered from a technological or a conceptual basis. It is something which is doable, and we know from the payments world as well that interoperability, cross-jurisdictional interoperability, is doable. In fact, in Europe, we have even cross-jurisdictional legislation for organizing this identity. So the message of this group of, identity experts, enthusiasts, believers is very much, okay, there is no reason not to do this. and get moving. And it is, and there is also a significant cost of not doing this in the end. And that is also, I think, the urgency of this we try to also bring across, that it should come higher on the agenda of the C-suite of financial institutions. Because we see a world where identity will become unbundled more and more from financial services. In fact, we need identity also for non-financial services more and more. And that will make that the customer relevancy, the client. But the biggest risk is that identities and data become more and more centralized. And that is the cost of doing nothing, where we will end up with most of our data in a few large platforms.
I think it's interesting and motivational for many of the authors who ask themselves a simple question. Why are the institutions that, by and large, are the most trusted institutions across the globe, banks, not involved with the development, the monetization, the securing, and the sharing of identity data, when at the same time, the least regulated, most centralized, least trusted platform providers are exploiting and monetizing identity data to the fare thee well? We have a few trillion-dollar companies that know the value of identity data, particularly in its online transactional form. So we live in this world where banks are largely, by virtue of regulation and culture, removed from one of the most important global phenomenons, which is, who do we trust with our data? Who do we trust with our money? Who can secure that on both a personal but also enterprise level? And how is that built?
Okay. Now I was thinking of an off-the-record question, because you mentioned this idea of trust in banks, but on the other hand, fintech, is filling in that void that Tony was mentioning in Citi's white paper. How are going banks to gain consumers' trust, or not necessarily trust, because this in a way is already gain? How are they going to compete with fintechs and big techs?
Well, the first thing banks have to do is understand the difference between competitors and adversaries.
Okay.
And what banks have to do is collaborate with competitors. They have to be able to trust other banks with data that those other banks might provide them, EKYC data, for example. And they in turn have to be trusted by other banks and other financial institutions in that network for the integrity and the security of that identity data. So banks need to collaborate. And I think that's where we're at. The inflection point is banks have finally realized, large and small, that they can't do it themselves, that they have to find some way, as they have in the past with SWIFT, of coming up with a global infrastructure. And that's what we want to catalyze, that global infrastructure that allows banks and other fintechs to compete for the customer's business, both their monetary and their data business.
And grow the pie bigger together, instead of fighting over every customer. And to be very precise, in the white paper addresses financial institutions. So we are not solely limited to banks as we know most as users. So there is a bigger category, and fintechs are financial institutions if they have a regulated status. So they fit very well naturally as indeed working with your competitors. And in the financial world, the payment and the whole the scheme thinking is coming from a typical part of a financial world. If you're in lending or in saving, there is less network effects and less market infrastructure. And we are talking here about a upgrade of the market infrastructure, because that is how the financial industry works together. It is built upon the market infrastructure, which is also dubbed as a soft infrastructure. And soft meaning it's not only about the hardware, but it's as well about the rules of legal, operational, and technical things. So this whole coordination and governance around it is extremely well organized in the financial world when it comes to these operational processes. So we see it also more as an upgrade of this, and such we can have a global coverage and also a global user experience. Because that also creates more safety, more security. Just like everyone on the globe knows how a card payment works, but there are so many different cards, so many logos, colors, and savings plans. But we are all wired to detect when a card payment is not how it should work. That helps for the situational awareness and so on. And with identity, we aren't there yet. But identity is the most important transaction, because even in payments, it's the authentication which determines the user experience. So in the past, some people said, if you solve identity, then the rest is accounting, and identity is dictating this. But Don, you want to say something?
Well, some people say, well, why do we keep focusing on this intersection between identity and banking? And my answer is the same answer as the question earlier to a famous American bank robber named Willie Sutton. And they said, Willie, why do you rob banks? And he said, well, that's where the money is. And where the money is in identity is in this intersection between our behavior online, our increasing trust in online infrastructure, and the need for securing that. So I think this is a matter of real urgency, and that's what's bringing these 100 people who are meeting each other for the first time in this great, robust discussion and debate about what can be done today. What does that blueprint look like? I guess the other motivator is that many of us, and I think my colleagues on this call and many of the folks that are listening to this, have been into innumerable conferences and white papers, et cetera, talking about digital identity. And one of our colleagues at the World Economic Forum summed it up very well, which is, we're all agreed, identity is important. Now what? And that's what we're trying to do with the paper, is to talk about now what when it comes to banking, when it comes to identity, and when it comes to trust online.
Yeah, so now a question for both of you. I noticed, you mentioned many times about urgency. Now what? Having an online infrastructure for digital identity. Will we have a global digital identity scheme anytime soon?
Well, you have one today called Facebook. You have a Chinese counterpart to that. The question is, do we want to see those business models and value sets migrate further from social to finance? So this is happening all around us.
And yes, the classical reaction over the past decade has been, yes, where's the business case? How can I make money from identity? But I sometimes try to think about, let's say, 120 years ago, when there were also people having, conferences, not video calls, about, okay, should we create an electricity grid, or should we create a network of railroads? And then, all individual players would probably say, well, I don't see a business case, a lot of investment, but not many clients. But if you would have asked, with the knowledge of today, what the business case would have been of a railroad or of a water, sewage, and all sorts of infrastructural things, that would look silly. So asking about the business case of digital identity is similar about asking the business case of railroads 100 years ago. But that is so. that's at least, I mean, that's my personal view, of course. And that doesn't convince easily people. So the most convincing thing to move people is to also find a business case. And I believe, for example, the KYC could be a topic. We could save a lot of cost and improve a lot of ease of use. But there are definitely also regulatory roadblocks to be solved, and also about liabilities and all of that. So there are also very practical angles which could short-term accelerate the interest from financial institutions in collaborating on things like, of digital identity. Beside all the topics, the arguments Don and I bring forward about, the cost of doing nothing and the regret we may have 5 years down the road when there is no way back.
Okay. So thank you both for such an insightful discussion on digital identity. And I'm looking forward to meet you, hopefully in person, in Munich in September at the European Identity and Cloud Conference. Thank you.